They built this place to keep girls like me out. But today, I walk in anyway.
The morning mist clung to Harvard's ancient brick walls as Zara Johnson walked across the cobblestone courtyard, her worn sneakers silent against stones that had witnessed centuries of privilege. Inside Sanders Auditorium, the air hummed with the quiet confidence of students who had never doubted their place in the world. But by sunset, that confidence would be shattered, careers would be ended, and one girl from Detroit would prove that sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he exposes him for the fraud he always was. This is the true story of how a 17-year-old from Detroit's East Side didn't just win Harvard's most prestigious debate tournament. She transformed it forever. What you're about to witness isn't just about academic competition. It's about courage, justice, and what happens when someone finally says enough to a system built on keeping people like her out. The autumn air carried the scent of fallen leaves and old money as Zara Johnson stepped through the wrought iron gates of Harvard University. Her fingers traced the strap of her worn canvas bag, the same bag she'd carried through the metal detectors of Lincoln High School in Detroit's East Side for 3 years. Now it felt impossibly small against the towering brick facades that seemed to whisper of centuries-old secrets. Sanders Auditorium rose before her like a cathedral of academic power. Gothic arches stretched toward a grey October sky, while brass plaques along the entrance bore the names of donors whose families had shaped American history for generations. Zara paused at the bottom of the stone steps, watching as students flowed past her in a river of pressed khakis, pearl earrings, and casual confidence. "Say, excuse me," a voice cut through the morning air like a blade dipped in honey and poison. Zara turned to find herself face to face with perhaps the most perfectly assembled human being she'd ever seen. Tall blonde, with shoulders that filled a navy blazer like it had been tailored by angels, Bradford Sterling IV looked like he'd stepped off the cover of an Ivy League brochure. His smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Who let you in here?" The question hung in the crisp autumn air, dripping with both amusement and contempt. Around them, other students slowed their pace, sensing drama the way sharks sense blood in the water. A few phones appeared, cameras already rolling. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "I'm here for the Harvard National Debate Championship." Bradford's laugh was musical and cruel. "Oh, you're one of the community participants." He turned to his circle of friends, who had materialized around him like satellites around a sun. "I thought the diversity applications were due last month." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Zara's grip tightened on her bag strap, but something in her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Baby, their words only have the power you give them. You didn't come this far to fold now." She lifted her chin. "I'm Zara Johnson. I qualified through the Southeast Regional Championship." "Zara Johnson," Bradford repeated, as if testing how the name felt in his mouth. "From—" "Where exactly?" "Detroit." "Ah." His smile widened. "Well, this should be educational." As Bradford and his entourage swept into the building, Zara stood alone on the steps. The early morning mist seemed to swirl around her, and for a moment, the weight of every doubt, every whispered comment about her worthiness settled on her shoulders like a lead blanket. But then she remembered the acceptance letter, the months of preparation, the sacrifices her mother had made, working double shifts to pay for tournament fees and debate camp, the countless nights they'd spent at their kitchen table, crafting arguments by lamplight. Zara Johnson had not traveled 750 miles to be anyone's diversity story. She climbed the steps. But what they didn't realize about the girl from Detroit was that she had spent months studying every single one of them, their techniques, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their blind spots. Inside Sanders Auditorium, the atmosphere hummed with the electric energy of competition. Mahogany panels lined the walls, their dark wood reflecting the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Oil paintings of former Harvard presidents watched over the proceedings with stern, knowing eyes. The space felt less like a classroom and more like a courtroom where the fate of future leaders would be decided. Zara found herself assigned to table 47, conspicuously placed in the back corner, as if the organizers weren't quite sure what to do with her. She pulled out her notebook, its cover worn soft from months of use, and began reviewing her preparation notes. Around her, the room filled with the confident chatter of America's academic elite. At the front of the auditorium, Bradford Sterling IV held court at table 1. His friends clustered around him like courtiers. Alexandra Whitman from Greenwich Academy, whose mother sat on the board of 3 museums. Marcus Chen from Exeter, whose father had argued cases before the Supreme Court. And Victoria Ashworth from Groton, whose family name adorned buildings across 3 Ivy League campuses. "The topic this year is particularly amusing," Bradford was saying, his voice carrying just far enough for nearby tables to hear. "Something about economic inequality in educational access. I suppose they want us to pretend there's actually a debate to be had." Alexandra laughed, a sound like silver bells with sharp edges. "It's so transparent. They bring in these participants and then choose topics designed to make us feel guilty about our advantages. As if success was something to apologize for," Victoria added, adjusting the string of pearls that had belonged to her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother before that. Zara kept her eyes on her notes, but every word landed like a small cut. She thought of her mother, Denise Johnson, who cleaned office buildings from midnight to 6 a.m. and then served breakfast at a diner until noon, just to keep their small apartment and pay for Zara's debate club fees. She thought of Lincoln High School, where half the textbooks were older than the students, and the debate team practiced in a storage closet because the auditorium's roof leaked. But she also thought of the 37 debate tournaments she'd won on her way here, the full scholarship to Michigan State that waited for her if she could just make it through senior year, the acceptance letter from Harvard's summer program that would arrive when she proved herself worthy. Professor Diana Whitmore stepped to the podium, her silver hair pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her already sharp features. She was a legend in academic debate circles, a former Oxford debater who'd trained 3 Supreme Court clerks and countless political leaders. Her reputation for being impossible to impress was matched only by her eye for genuine talent. "Welcome to the Harvard National Debate Championship," Professor Whitmore began, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of overachievers. "This year's participants represent 43 states and the District of Columbia. You are here because you have demonstrated excellence in regional competition." Her eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on Zara's table before continuing. "The elimination format is simple. Preliminary rounds will narrow our field from 128 participants to 16. From there, we proceed to quarterfinals, semi-finals, and finally, Sunday's championship round. The winner receives a full scholarship to Harvard University and automatic qualification for the national circuit." A murmur of excitement rippled through the audience. For most of these students, Harvard admission was a family tradition, not a life-changing opportunity. But for Zara, it represented something else entirely, proof that she belonged in rooms like this one. "Your first topic," Professor Whitmore continued, "will be released in 1 hour. Preliminary debates begin this afternoon. I suggest you use your time wisely." As the crowd began to disperse, Zara overheard Bradford's voice behind her. "1 hour should be more than enough," he was telling his friends. "I've been preparing for Harvard admission since I was 12. This is just a formality." But what Bradford Sterling didn't know was that while he'd been preparing for Harvard admission, Zara Johnson had been preparing for war. The first elimination round would reveal if Detroit grit could match Boston privilege. But nobody expected what Zara was hiding. The Widener Library stood like a temple to knowledge, its massive columns and endless corridors housing over 15 million books. Zara found a quiet corner on the 3rd floor, spreading her research materials across a table that probably cost more than her family's monthly rent. Around her, other competitors huddled in similar study sessions, but none seemed to be working with quite the same intensity. For the past 6 months, Zara had done something none of them expected. She had studied them. Not just debate theory or current events, but them specifically. She'd watched YouTube videos of their previous tournaments, analyzed their argument patterns, identified their favorite rhetorical tricks. While they'd been assuming their competition would come from other elite schools, she'd been preparing for them personally. Bradford Sterling IV always opened with a historical precedent, usually something obscure enough to make him seem well-read, but not so obscure as to confuse judges. He favored logical fallacy accusations during cross-examination and had a tendency to speak faster when he was losing ground. Alexandra Whitman relied heavily on emotional appeals but struggled with quantitative data. Marcus Chen was brilliant with legal precedent, but got flustered when opponents attacked his core premises. Victoria Ashworth had perfect delivery, but often failed to adapt when debates took unexpected turns. Zara had notebooks full of these observations, compiled during late nights in Detroit, when she should have been sleeping. Her mother often found her at the kitchen table at 2 a.m., laptop glowing, studying debate footage like a football coach preparing for the championship. "Baby, you sure you're not overdoing this?" Denise Johnson would ask, setting down a cup of tea that had become their nightly ritual. "Mama, they've been preparing for this their whole lives," Zara would reply, not looking up from her screen. "I've got 6 months to catch up to 16 years of advantages. I can't afford to underprepare." Now sitting in Harvard's legendary library, Zara felt the weight of that preparation. The first topic had been announced. Resolved. Economic inequality in educational access is the greatest threat to American democracy. It was perfect. Not because it played to her background, though it did, but because she'd anticipated something exactly like this. Elite academic competitions loved topics that seemed progressive while actually reinforcing existing power structures. They wanted to debate inequality in the abstract, not confront it in the concrete. But Zara had lived inequality. She'd experienced the crumbling infrastructure of underfunded schools, the way talented teachers left for districts that could afford to pay them, the quiet desperation of students who knew they were being shortchanged but had no power to change it. More importantly, she'd researched the statistics, the policy papers, the court cases. She knew that 40% of Harvard's student body came from families in the top 1% of income distribution. She knew that students from the bottom income quintile made up less than 4% of enrollment at elite universities. She knew these numbers not as abstract data points, but as the mathematical expression of her own experience. As she outlined her argument structure, Zara noticed Bradford Sterling at a nearby table, surrounded by his usual entourage. He was holding court, explaining his strategy with the casual confidence of someone who'd never doubted his own success. "The key is to frame inequality as a meritocracy issue," he was saying. "Acknowledge that differences exist, but argue that they reflect natural variations in talent and effort rather than systemic barriers." Classic, liberal guilt deflection. His friends nodded appreciatively. Victoria leaned forward. "What about the opposing argument? Someone's bound to bring up structural disadvantages." Bradford's smile was sharp. "Simple. You pivot to success stories. Point to examples of people who overcame disadvantages through hard work and determination. It neutralizes the systemic argument while reinforcing individual responsibility narratives." Zara felt something cold settle in her stomach. He was talking about people like her as rhetorical strategies, not human beings. She was the success story he planned to weaponize against her own argument. But Bradford Sterling had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed that being from a disadvantaged background made her a symbol, not a strategist. He'd prepared to debate against what he thought she represented, not who she actually was. When the preliminary round pairings were announced that afternoon, Zara found herself ranked dead last, position 128 out of 128. The message was clear. She was here to fill a quota, not to compete. But what they didn't realize was that the quiet girl from Detroit had been systematically studying every assumption they'd made about her and preparing to shatter them all. When the scores were posted, everyone's assumptions would be shattered, including Bradford's. The preliminary round took place in Harvard Law School's Ames courtroom, a space that had witnessed mock trials and real arguments for over a century. Mahogany benches rose in tiered rows, while portraits of distinguished alumni looked down from the walls with the stern dignity of men who'd shaped American jurisprudence. Zara's opponent was Timothy Morrison III from Choate Rosemary Hall, a boarding school that cost more per year than most people's salaries. Timothy had the easy confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world, the kind of relaxed preparation that came from knowing that even if he lost this debate, he'd still end up at an excellent university. Professor Whitmore served as the judge, her silver hair gleaming under the courtroom's brass fixtures. Her reputation preceded her, 3 decades of training debate champions, with an eye for talent that had become legendary in academic circles. "Mr. Morrison, you have the affirmative," Professor Whitmore announced. "Ms. Johnson, you'll argue the negative." The resolution is economic inequality and educational access is the greatest threat to American democracy. You have 7 minutes for opening statements. Timothy rose with practiced ease. His argument was polished, well-researched, and exactly what Zara had expected. He spoke of America as a meritocracy, where success reflected individual effort, acknowledged that disparities existed while arguing they were natural variations rather than systemic failures. He cited statistics about social mobility, referenced historical examples of individuals who'd overcome disadvantages, and painted economic inequality as a challenge to be managed rather than a crisis to be solved. It was textbook elite liberal argumentation, sophisticated enough to sound enlightened, careful enough not to challenge fundamental power structures. When Zara stood for her rebuttal, the room fell silent. She could feel the weight of assumptions settling around her like fog, the expectation that she'd make this personal, that she'd rely on emotion rather than evidence, that she'd prove exactly what they all suspected about students like her. Instead, she began with data. Mr. Morrison's argument relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of how educational access functions in American democracy, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. He references social mobility statistics without acknowledging that social mobility in the United States has declined by 50% since 1940, according to longitudinal data from Harvard's own Equality of Opportunity project. She paused, letting the irony of citing Harvard research in Harvard's own courtroom settle. More importantly, he frames this as an individual responsibility issue when the evidence shows systematic resource disparities. Students in the bottom income quartile are 4 times less likely to graduate from college than those in the top quartile, controlling for academic ability. This isn't about individual merit. It's about structural barriers. Timothy's confident smile began to waver. This wasn't the emotional appeal he'd prepared to counter. Zara continued, building her argument with the precision of a surgeon. She cited Supreme Court cases, referenced international comparisons, dismantled Timothy's examples of individual success by showing them to be statistical outliers rather than representative patterns. Democracy requires informed participation, she concluded. When educational access correlates more strongly with family income than with academic potential, we're not selecting for merit. We're replicating existing hierarchies. That's not just inefficient, it's antithetical to democratic principles. The cross-examination that followed was brutal. Timothy tried to regain ground by questioning her statistics, challenging her interpretations, pivoting back to individual responsibility narratives. But Zara had anticipated every move. She'd studied not just the data, but the rhetorical strategies elite debaters use to defend privilege while appearing progressive. When the round ended, Professor Whitmore's expression was unreadable. She scribbled notes on her evaluation sheet, glanced up at Zara with something that might have been surprise, and dismissed both debaters. That afternoon, the preliminary rankings were posted on a bulletin board outside Sanders Auditorium. A crowd gathered immediately, students pushing forward to find their names on the list that would determine who moved forward and who went home. Zara approached cautiously, her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd done well, she thought, but she'd been confident before only to discover that confidence and achievement were different things entirely. The rankings were listed in descending order. Bradford Sterling IV held the top position as expected. Alexandra Whitman was second, Marcus Chen third. Zara scanned down the list, past familiar names from elite schools, past students she'd researched and prepared for. Then she saw it. Zara Johnson, rank 12. She'd made the cut, barely but definitively. Of 128 participants, only the top 16 advanced to quarterfinals. She was in. Around her she heard the whispered conversations. Who is she again? Some public school from Michigan, I think. Detroit, someone corrected. Has to be a diversity admission. No way she scored above Jennifer. Or Marcus's teammate from Andover. Zara felt the familiar heat of assumptions being made about her, but this time it was accompanied by something else. The quiet satisfaction of proving people wrong with nothing but competence. Behind her, Bradford Sterling's voice cut through the crowd noise. "Well, look at that," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Miracles really do happen." His friends laughed appreciatively, but when Zara turned to look at him, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. a tightness around his eyes, a tension in his perfect jaw. For the first time, Bradford Sterling 4 was looking at her not as a diversity story or a curiosity, but as competition. And that, Zara realized, was exactly where she wanted to be. Bradford Sterling had never lost to someone like her, and he wasn't about to start now. What he did next would cross every line of fair competition and threaten to destroy everything Zara had worked for. The Quincy House common room felt like a sanctuary after the intensity of the day's competition. With its leather armchairs, Persian rugs, and walls lined with books that looked older than the university itself, it was the kind of space designed to make students feel like they were inheriting centuries of intellectual tradition. Zara sat alone by the fireplace, her laptop open to a document titled Quarterfinal Prep, Technology and Democracy. The topic had been announced that afternoon. Resolved, digital technology has strengthened democratic participation more than it has undermined democratic institutions. It was a complex topic that required balancing technological optimism with concerns about misinformation, social media echo chambers, and digital divides. Zara had 6 hours to prepare before tomorrow's 8 a.m. round, and she intended to use every minute. Around her, other competitors worked in small groups or huddled alone with their research. The atmosphere was tense with the kind of focused energy that came from knowing half the remaining field would be eliminated tomorrow. At 11:47 p.m., her laptop chimed with a new email. The sender was listed as Debate, Edmony Harvard Edu, the same address that had sent tournament updates and schedule changes throughout the weekend. The subject line read, Urgent, Topic Change, Quarterfinal Round. Zara's stomach dropped as she opened the message. Due to scheduling conflicts with visiting faculty panel, your debate topic has been changed for tomorrow's quarterfinal round. Please prepare to argue the following resolution. Resolved. The American education system rewards conformity over creativity, ultimately stifling innovation and democratic discourse. This change applies to your round only. Failure to comply will result in disqualification. Please confirm receipt. Harvard Debate Administration panic flooded through Zara's chest. She stared at the screen, reading the message 3 times before its implications fully sank in. 6 hours of preparation wasted, a completely different topic that she'd have to research, outline, and practice before dawn. She scrolled back through her email folder, looking for similar messages sent to other competitors. Nothing. No one else seemed to have received topic changes. But maybe they'd been sent to different email addresses, or maybe she was the only one with scheduling conflicts. The rational part of her mind whispered that something was wrong, but the anxious part, the part that had always expected to be found inadequate, to be revealed as someone who didn't belong, drowned out rational thought with panic. Zara closed her laptop and hurried back to her assigned dorm room. She had 5.5 hours to master an entirely new topic. She couldn't afford to waste time questioning the email's authenticity. What she didn't know was that across campus, in a Greek revival mansion that housed Harvard's most exclusive final club, Bradford Sterling IV was celebrating with a bottle of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Cheers, he said, raising his glass to Marcus Chen and Alexandra Whitman. To removing obstacles. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Bradford, are you sure about this? If anyone finds out... Finds out what? Bradford's smile was sharp enough to cut crystal. That I sent an email? That I used publicly available information to solve a problem? You fabricated an official communication from the university, Alexandra said quietly. That's fraud. Bradford's laugh was musical and cold. It's strategy. Do you know what my father told me when I was 12 years old? He said, Son, the difference between winning and losing isn't talent or luck. It's willingness to do what others won't. He took a sip of champagne, savoring both the taste and the moment. Besides, we're not cheating, we're simply leveling the playing field. She had advantages. Sympathy, narrative, the judge's desire to reward diversity. This just ensures the competition is based on actual merit. Victoria Ashworth, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke. What if she figures it out? Bradford's smile widened. She won't. People like her are used to obstacles. They expect unfairness. She'll prepare for the new topic, do her best. And when she loses tomorrow, everyone will nod sympathetically and say she gave it a good effort. Back in her dorm room, Zara worked through the night. She researched educational philosophy, studied creativity versus conformity in academic settings, outlined arguments about standardized testing, institutional structures, and innovation stifling. By 6 a.m. her eyes burned and her head throbbed, but she had a coherent argument. At 7:30 a.m. she walked into the quarterfinal room with her hastily prepared notes, ready to debate educational conformity versus creativity. Professor Whitmore was there early, reviewing her judging materials. When she saw Zara, her eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Ms. Johnson, what are you doing here so early?" "I wanted to review my notes one more time before the round," Zara replied. The topic change was challenging to prepare for on short notice. Professor Whitmore's confusion deepened. Topic change? What topic change? The words hit Zara like a physical blow. "The email," she said weakly. "Last night, about the scheduling conflict with the visiting faculty panel." Professor Whitmore's expression hardened. "There was no email. There was no topic change. Your round is still resolved. Digital technology has strengthened democratic participation more than it has undermined democratic institutions." Zara felt the room tilt around her. "But The email came from debate. Admine Harvard, Edu. Show me." With trembling fingers, Zara pulled out her phone and opened the email. Professor Whitmore read it carefully, her lips forming a thin line. "This is fake," she said finally. "The sender address has been spoofed. This is not from us." The reality crashed over Zara in waves. Someone had deliberately sabotaged her preparation. Someone had wanted her to fail. "Professor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "my round starts in 30 minutes. I prepared for the wrong topic all night." Professor Whitmore studied her for a long moment. There was something in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or respect for someone who'd been dealt an unfair hand, but was still standing. "Then you'll have to debate the real topic, with whatever preparation you can manage in the next 25 minutes, she said finally. "Unless you want to withdraw." Zara thought about her mother, working double shifts to pay for this opportunity. She thought about Lincoln High School, where she'd left teammates who were counting on her to prove that students like them belonged in places like this. She thought about Bradford Sterling's smug smile and the assumptions everyone had made about her. "I'm not withdrawing," she said. Professor Whitmore nodded. "I didn't think you would." But who would go so far to sabotage her? And what they did next was unforgivable. In the 23 minutes she had before her quarter-final round, Zara Johnson performed what could only be described as academic surgery. She sat in an empty classroom down the hall from her debate venue, furiously scribbling notes about digital technology's impact on democracy, while her mind raced through everything she'd prepared the night before. Some of it was salvageable. Arguments about educational conformity could be adapted to discuss echo chambers and algorithmic filtering. Research on institutional barriers could translate to discussions of digital divides. It wasn't ideal preparation, but it was something. Her opponent, Rebecca Martinez from Phillips Exeter, had clearly spent weeks preparing. Her opening statement was polished, comprehensive, and devastating. She spoke fluently about social media's role in political mobilization, cited studies on increased civic engagement among digital natives, and built a compelling case that technology had democratized access to information and political participation. When Zara stood for her rebuttal, she felt like she was walking onto a battlefield without armor. But something her mother had taught her during those late-night prep sessions echoed in her mind. "Baby, when you don't have advantages, you have to make them." So Zara did something unexpected. Instead of trying to match Rebecca's comprehensive preparation, she went deeper on specific examples. "Ms. Martinez paints an optimistic picture of digital democracy," she began, "but her argument assumes that access to information automatically translates to informed participation. The evidence suggests otherwise." She spoke about the 2020 election, citing specific studies on misinformation spread rates, the role of algorithmic amplification in political polarization, and the way digital platforms had been weaponized to undermine rather than strengthen democratic norms. "More concerning," she continued, "is the digital divide that Ms. Martinez's argument ignores. When she talks about increased civic engagement, she's describing the experiences of people with reliable internet access, digital literacy, and the leisure time to participate in online political discourse. But 21% of American adults still lack broadband internet access, and that percentage skyrockets in rural and low-income communities. It wasn't her best performance, but it was cogent, specific, and demonstrated exactly the kind of adaptability that impressed judges like Professor Whitmore. After the round, as competitors filtered out of the building, Professor Whitmore approached Zara quietly. "Walk with me," she said. They strolled across Harvard Yard in silence for several minutes. The autumn morning was crisp, with golden leaves spiraling down from ancient elms that had shaded students since before the American Revolution. "I've been judging debates for 30 years, Professor Whitmore said finally. "I've seen every kind of preparation, every type of student, every variety of talent and limitation." She paused by the statue of John Harvard, where tourists typically gathered to rub the bronze figure's foot for luck. "What you did in there, adapting to a completely different topic with no preparation time, that's not something you can teach. That's intellectual agility of the highest order." Zara felt a flush of pride, but Professor Whitmore wasn't finished. "It also tells me that someone wanted very badly for you not to succeed. The email you received wasn't just a prank. It was sophisticated, targeted, and designed to eliminate you from competition." They began walking again, their footsteps echoing off the brick pathways that had witnessed centuries of academic ambition. "I forwarded the email to Harvard's IT security team," Professor Whitmore continued. "They'll trace the source. But I want you to understand something. This level of sabotage doesn't happen in a vacuum. Someone sees you as a serious threat." That afternoon, the quarterfinal results were posted. Zara had advanced, ranked 5th out of the 8 remaining competitors. Bradford Sterling maintained his top position, but his margin was narrower than before. As students gathered around the results board, Zara overheard fragments of conversation. How did she advance after what happened this morning? Wait, what happened this morning? Someone sent her a fake email changing her topic. She had to debate completely unprepared. And she still won? Against Rebecca Martinez? Who would do something like that? The whispers followed Zara as she walked back to her dorm, but instead of feeling isolated, she felt something else, the growing awareness that her success was making powerful people nervous. In his final club that evening, Bradford Sterling paced in front of a crackling fireplace while his friends watched with growing unease. "She should have been eliminated," he said, his usual composure cracking. "The topic change should have been enough." "Maybe we should just accept that she's good," Marcus suggested quietly. "I mean, advancing to semi-finals from a public school in Detroit? That's actually pretty impressive." Bradford whirled around, his face flushed with anger. "Impressive? She's taking a spot that belongs to someone who's actually earned it. Do you know how many qualified candidates didn't even get invitations to this tournament?" "Bradford," Alexandra said carefully, "maybe it's time to just focus on your own performance." But Bradford Sterling IV had never faced real competition from someone he considered beneath him. The possibility of losing to Zara Johnson wasn't just academically unacceptable. It was existentially threatening to everything he'd been taught about merit, worthiness, and his place in the world. What the IT security team would discover the next morning was a trail of digital breadcrumbs leading back to a computer registered under the name B. Sterling. Evidence that would transform this academic competition into something much more serious. The truth about Harvard's golden boy was about to surface, and what they found would shock everyone. Jennifer Park from Harvard's IT security division arrived at Sanders Auditorium at 7 a.m. sharp, carrying a laptop and the kind of focused intensity that came from spending 30 years chasing digital criminals. Professor Whitmore met her at the entrance, both women sharing the grim satisfaction of people who were about to expose something ugly. The email spoofing was sophisticated but not perfect, Dr. Park explained as they walked through the empty auditorium. Whoever did this understood how to mask sender addresses and forge headers, but they made one crucial mistake. She opened her laptop and pulled up a screen full of code that looked like digital hieroglyphics to anyone without computer forensics training. They used the university's own Wi-Fi network to send the message. Every device that connects to Harvard's system leaves a digital fingerprint. MAC addresses, device identifiers, connection logs. It took our team about 4 hours to trace the source. Professor Whitmore leaned forward. And The message was sent from a laptop registered to Bradford Sterling IV, connected to the Porcellian Club's network at 11:43 p.m. on October 15th. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications. Professor Whitmore had suspected sabotage, but having proof was different from having suspicions. "Are you certain?" she asked. Dr. Park nodded. "Absolutely. We pulled network logs, cross-referenced device registrations, and confirmed the MAC address match unless someone stole Mr. Sterling's laptop and used it specifically to frame him, which would be an extraordinary coincidence. He's our sender." By 8 a.m., word of the IT investigation had spread through the tournament community like wildfire. Nothing official had been announced, but academic competitions were small worlds where rumors traveled faster than facts. Zara noticed the change immediately. Conversations stopped when she walked by. Other competitors looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Most significantly, Bradford Sterling's usual entourage had begun keeping their distance. The semi-final matchups were announced at 10 a.m. Zara Johnson versus Marcus Chen, Bradford Sterling versus Alexandra Whitman. The winners would face each other in Sunday's championship round. Marcus approached Zara during the lunch break, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "About Bradford." They found a secluded corner in Widener Library, surrounded by centuries of accumulated knowledge and the dusty smell of old books. "He's been talking about you," Marcus continued. "Not just trash talk, that's normal. Something darker. He's obsessed with the idea that you don't belong here." Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with Harvard's autumn weather. "What do you mean?" "Thursday night after the rankings were posted, he spent 2 hours researching your background. Your school, your debate record, your family. He was looking for something he could use against you." Marcus paused, clearly struggling with loyalty to a longtime friend versus doing what was right. "Friday, he made comments about leveling the playing field and ensuring merit-based outcomes. I thought he was just being Bradford, entitled and obnoxious, but now with this email thing, you think he sent it." "I think Bradford Sterling has never lost to someone he considers beneath him," Marcus said carefully. "And I think he'd rather destroy the competition than face the possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone from a public school in Detroit might actually be better than him." The weight of Marcus's words settled between them like a stone dropped in still water. Zara had suspected sabotage, but hearing confirmation that it was personal, that Bradford saw her not just as competition, but as an existential threat to his worldview, made everything feel more dangerous. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "Alexandra and Victoria are starting to distance themselves from him. Even his closest friends are getting uncomfortable with how far he's willing to go." That afternoon, during the semi-final preparation period, Professor Whitmore made an unexpected announcement to the remaining competitors. "Due to concerns about electronic security," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made everyone look up from their notes, "all remaining rounds will take place under enhanced monitoring. Additionally, any participant found to have engaged in unsportsmanlike conduct or academic dishonesty will be immediately disqualified and banned from future competitions." The message was subtle but clear. They knew something had happened and they were watching. Zara's semi-final against Marcus was scheduled for 4 p.m. The topic: resolved. American foreign policy should prioritize human rights over economic interests. It was a classic debate subject that allowed for sophisticated argumentation on both sides. As 4 p.m. approached, Zara noticed something she'd never seen before: other competitors gathering to watch her round. Word had spread about the sabotage, about her ability to adapt under pressure, about the possibility that a girl from Detroit might actually make it to Harvard's championship round. When she walked into the debate venue, the same Ames courtroom where she'd scored her first upset, the audience was larger than any preliminary round she'd seen. Students, faculty, even some tournament staff had come to witness what was becoming more than just an academic competition. Marcus was a formidable opponent, brilliant, well-prepared, and genuinely likable in a way that Bradford had never been. But there was something different about Zara now. The sabotage had burned away her last remnants of imposter syndrome. She wasn't here because of diversity or luck or sympathy. She was here because she belonged. The debate was extraordinary. Marcus opened with a sophisticated argument about economic realism, citing examples from Cold War diplomacy and contemporary trade relationships. Zara countered with human rights law, moral imperatives, and the long-term strategic benefits of principled foreign policy. But the real battle was in cross-examination. Marcus pressed her on practical implementation, on the costs of moral stances in an amoral international system. Zara responded by questioning the fundamental premise that economic interests and human rights were inherently in conflict. Mr. Chen assumes that supporting human rights is economically costly, she said during her rebuttal. But this ignores decades of evidence showing that stable democracies with strong human rights protections are America's most reliable trading partners and strategic allies. The choice isn't between morality and pragmatism. It's between short-term profits and long-term stability. When the round ended, the courtroom erupted in applause, not the polite clapping typical of academic debates, but genuine appreciation for two students operating at the highest level of intellectual competition. Professor Whitmore's decision was swift. Zara Johnson would advance to the championship round. As Marcus shook her hand afterward, he whispered, "You earned this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But across campus, in the Porcellian Club's oak-paneled library, Bradford Sterling IV was learning that his semi-final opponent had just withdrawn from the tournament due to family emergency. Alexandra Whitman's sudden departure meant Bradford would advance to the finals by default, ensuring the confrontation that had been building all weekend would finally take place. Sunday's championship round would pit Zara Johnson against Bradford Sterling IV in front of the largest audience in the tournament's history, and by then, everyone would know exactly who had sent that email. What happened next would destroy everything Bradford had built on lies and privilege. Sunday morning dawned grey and cold over Cambridge, with the kind of October chill that seemed to seep into Harvard's ancient brick and mortar. Zara woke at 6 a.m. in her temporary dorm room, not because of an alarm but because sleep had become impossible. In 6 hours, she would face Bradford Sterling IV in the championship round of the most prestigious high school debate tournament in America. The morning edition of the Harvard Crimson lay outside her door, and Zara's breath caught when she saw the headline, "Email Fraud Investigation Rocks Debate Tournament." The article, written by a journalism student who'd been covering the competition, laid out the basic facts. A competitor had received a fraudulent email designed to sabotage their preparation. Harvard IT had traced the source, and disciplinary action was pending. They didn't name Bradford directly. Journalistic ethics and legal liability prevented that. But anyone following the tournament could connect the dots. Across campus, Bradford Sterling sat in his family's private suite at the Charles Hotel, staring at the same newspaper article while his father paced behind him like a caged predator. James Sterling III was everything his son aspired to be, a corporate titan whose name appeared on Forbes lists and whose political connections reached the highest levels of government. He was also someone who understood that reputation was the only currency that truly mattered in elite circles. "Explain to me," James said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that had made competitors tremble in boardrooms across 3 continents, "how my son, who has been groomed for success since birth, managed to get himself involved in a cheating scandal at a high school debate tournament." Bradford's usual composure had cracked completely. Gone was the polished confidence that had carried him through 16 years of elite education. In its place was something desperate and raw. "She doesn't belong here," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "Do you understand that? She's taking a spot that should go to someone who's actually earned it, someone who's been preparing for this their entire life." James stopped pacing. "Someone like you mean?" "Yes, like me. I've been training for Harvard admission since I was 12. I've attended every elite tournament, worked with the best coaches, studied under the most respected professors, and now some diversity admit from Detroit is going to beat me because the judges want to feel good about themselves." The silence that followed was worse than shouting. James Sterling had built an empire by reading people, by understanding motivations and weaknesses, and what he saw in his son's face terrified him. "Bradford," he said quietly, "do you hear yourself? Do you understand what you're saying?" But Bradford was beyond rational thought. "I did what was necessary. I leveled the playing field. Without the advantages of sympathy and narrative, she would have been eliminated rounds ago." James sank into a leather chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. "The email. You actually sent it. I ensured a merit-based outcome." You committed fraud against Harvard University, son. Do you have any idea what this means for our family's reputation, for your future? Meanwhile, in Sanders' auditorium, Professor Whitmore was meeting with Dr. Park and Dean Richardson, Harvard's chief disciplinary officer. The evidence was overwhelming, but the timing created a complicated situation. We have absolute proof that Bradford Sterling sent the fraudulent email, Dr. Park was saying. MAC address, network logs, timestamp correlation, it's ironclad. Dean Richardson, a distinguished man in his 60s who'd spent decades navigating academic politics, rubbed his temples. The championship round is scheduled for 2 p.m. We have media coverage, alumni attendance, and significant institutional investment in this tournament's reputation. You're not suggesting we ignore fraud because it's inconvenient, Professor Whitmore said sharply. I'm suggesting we consider all implications. If we disqualify Sterling now, it looks like we're manufacturing a victory for Ms. Johnson. If we wait until after the round, it appears we prioritize tournament publicity over academic integrity. Professor Whitmore's expression could have frozen the Charles River. There's a third option. We let them debate, and let Bradford Sterling's performance speak for itself. If he wins through legitimate means despite his earlier fraud, we deal with the disciplinary consequences afterward. If he loses to someone he tried to sabotage, Dean Richardson finished, which becomes part of his punishment. Dr. Park looked between them. Are you certain Ms. Johnson can handle the pressure? This has become about much more than debate competition. Professor Whitmore thought about Zara's performance the previous morning, the way she'd adapted to complete topic sabotage with grace and intellectual agility that had impressed even her harshest critics. Diana Whitmore, she said with quiet confidence, has been underestimated her entire life. I suspect she'll handle whatever Bradford Sterling can throw at her. At 1 p.m., an hour before the championship round, both finalists received identical emails, this time verified as authentic by Harvard's IT security team. The championship topic: resolved. Traditional institutions remain the best guardians of academic integrity. The irony was so perfect, it felt scripted. Zara read the topic in her prep room and almost laughed. After 3 days of experiencing exactly how traditional institutions protected their own interests, she was being asked to defend their role as integrity guardians. She thought about the email fraud, about the assumptions everyone had made about her qualifications, about the way elite academic competitions simultaneously celebrated merit while systematically excluding students like her. Then she began outlining the most important argument of her life. In 24 hours, one of them would be champion, but only one of them truly deserved it. The evidence Professor Whitmore had discovered would change everything, if she chose to reveal it. Sanders' auditorium had never seen anything like it. What had begun as a routine academic tournament had transformed into something closer to a public trial. The usual sparse audience of competitors and coaches had swelled to include faculty members, administrators, journalists, and even some Harvard students who'd heard about the scandal through social media. Zara walked into the auditorium at 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the championship round. The murmur of conversation died as she entered, replaced by the kind of charged silence that accompanies moments when everyone understands they're witnessing something historically significant. She wore the same thrift store blazer she'd bought for $12 at a Goodwill in Detroit, but something about her presence had transformed. Gone was the uncertain girl who'd been questioned about her right to be here. In her place stood someone who'd earned her position through 3 days of proving herself against the best competition in the country. Bradford Sterling entered from the opposite side of the auditorium, flanked by his father and what appeared to be a lawyer. His usual entourage of supporters was notably absent. Alexandra and Victoria had withdrawn from the tournament. Marcus was sitting with other competitors rather than Bradford's family, and even the Phillips Andover coaching staff had distanced themselves. Professor Whitmore took the judge's seat, with the gravity of someone who understood that this debate would be remembered long after the tournament ended. She judged thousands of rounds over 3 decades, but never one where so much hung in the balance. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, "this is the championship round of the Harvard National Debate Championship. The resolution is, traditional institutions remain the best guardians of academic integrity." She paused, letting the irony of the topic settle over an audience that knew exactly what had transpired over the weekend. Mr. Sterling, you have the affirmative. Ms. Johnson, you'll argue the negative. Mr. Sterling, you may begin. Bradford rose slowly, his usual fluid confidence replaced by something more mechanical. The weight of scrutiny, from the audience, from his father, from his own conscience, seemed to have settled on his shoulders like lead. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice slightly hoarse, traditional institutions like Harvard University have served as guardians of academic excellence for centuries because they possess the resources, expertise, and commitment necessary to maintain the highest standards. His argument was technically proficient, but emotionally hollow. He spoke of Harvard's legacy, of rigorous admission standards, of the quality control that came from institutional experience. But there was something desperate in his delivery, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as the judges. These institutions, he continued, provide structure, accountability, and continuity that ensure academic integrity across generations. They've weathered challenges and adapted to change while maintaining core principles that define scholarly excellence. When he finished, the applause was polite, but notably restrained. The audience had come expecting the Bradford Sterling they'd heard about, polished, confident, commanding. Instead, they'd witnessed someone going through the motions of arguments that felt increasingly hollow. Then Zara stood. She walked to the podium with the quiet confidence of someone who'd found her voice, not despite the obstacles she'd faced, but because of them. When she began speaking, her words carried the authority that comes from lived experience. This conversation isn't about whether traditional institutions have historically served important functions, she said, making eye contact with sections of the audience that included Harvard faculty and administrators. It's about whether they continue to serve those functions effectively, and whether their methods of guarding academic integrity actually promote or undermine the values they claim to protect. Her voice was calm but unwavering, each word chosen with surgical precision. Mr. Sterling argues that traditional institutions provide structure and accountability. But what kind of accountability are we talking about? When Harvard University, one of our most traditional institutions, hosts a competition where students can be sabotaged by fraudulent communications, and when that sabotage comes from within the very community these institutions claim to serve, we have to ask whether we're confusing tradition with effectiveness. A ripple of reaction moved through the audience. She wasn't just debating the topic, she was addressing the elephant in the room that everyone had been dancing around. More fundamentally, she continued, building momentum, we need to examine what we mean by academic integrity. If integrity means honest intellectual engagement, fair competition, and merit-based evaluation, then we should be concerned when traditional institutions consistently produce outcomes that correlate more strongly with family income and social connections than with actual academic ability. Bradford's face had gone pale. This wasn't the emotional, personal argument he'd expected. This was a systematic dismantling of everything he'd been taught about merit, worthiness, and institutional legitimacy. Zara pressed forward. Traditional institutions claim to guard academic integrity, but they often function more as gatekeepers, preserving access for established networks while creating barriers for outsiders. Real integrity would mean systems that identify and cultivate talent regardless of background, not systems that mistake privilege for preparation. She paused, letting her words resonate through an auditorium where many people were confronting uncomfortable truths about their own advantages. If you believe that only grades and test scores should determine worth, she said, echoing her argument from earlier rounds but with deeper conviction, then ask yourself, how many people in this room would be here without private tutors, elite prep schools, parents who knew how to navigate admission systems and the cultural capital that comes from generational familiarity? The silence that followed was deafening with these institutions. Zara had taken the debate topic and transformed it into a mirror, forcing everyone present to examine not just intellectual arguments, but their own complicity in systems they'd never questioned. When cross-examination began, Bradford tried to regain ground by attacking her statistics, questioning her sources, pivoting back to institutional legitimacy arguments. But something had broken in him. The confident rhetorical strategies that had carried him through years of competition felt suddenly inadequate against someone who was speaking not just with research but with truth. Ms. Johnson, he said during his cross-examination, his voice betraying frustration, are you suggesting that Harvard University, The institution hosting this tournament lacks academic integrity? Zara's response was devastating in its simplicity. I'm suggesting that academic integrity isn't something you inherit through tradition, Mr. Sterling. It's something you earn through your actions. The judges had everything they needed, but did they have the courage to make the right choice? The deliberation period lasted exactly 18 minutes, an eternity for the competitors, but barely enough time for the audience's tension to settle into the kind of charged anticipation that precedes historical moments. Professor Whitmore returned to the judges' table with Dean Richardson and 2 additional faculty members who'd been consulted during the decision process. Her expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in her posture, a straightness of spine, a set to her shoulders, that suggested a decision had been reached not just about the debate, but about something larger. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through Sanders Auditorium, after careful consideration of both arguments presented in today's championship round, we have reached a decision. The silence was so complete that Zara could hear her own heartbeat. Beside her, Bradford Sterling sat rigidly upright, his hands clenched in his lap, his father's presence a palpable weight behind him. This year's Harvard National Debate Championship has been remarkable not just for the quality of competition, but for the questions it has raised about merit, fairness, and the values we claim to uphold in academic discourse. Professor Whitmore paused, her gaze moving between the 2 finalists. The winner of this year's championship demonstrated not only superior argumentation and research, but the kind of intellectual courage and adaptability that represents the highest ideals of academic inquiry. More importantly, they showed us that excellence can emerge from unexpected places, and that our institutions are only as strong as our commitment to genuine merit over inherited advantage. Another pause. Zara felt time stretch like taffy. The winner of the 2024 Harvard National Debate Championship is Zara Johnson. For one suspended moment, the auditorium held its breath. Then applause erupted, not the polite academic clapping typical of these events, but genuine, sustained appreciation that seemed to come from deep recognition of what had just occurred. Zara sat in stunned silence, the words echoing in her mind as if heard from a great distance. She had won. Despite the sabotage, despite the assumptions, despite every obstacle placed in her path, she had won. Bradford Sterling remained frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and something approaching devastation. The carefully constructed world of his assumptions, about merit, about worthiness, about his place in the natural order, had just collapsed around him. His father, James Sterling III, was already calculating damage control, his corporate instincts engaged in full crisis management mode. The family's reputation, Bradford's future prospects, the political and social connections that had taken generations to build, all of it would need careful management in the coming days. But none of that mattered to Zara in the moment of victory. She rose slowly, walked to where Bradford sat and extended her hand. "Good round," she said simply. Bradford looked at her extended hand for a long moment. In that pause, the entire auditorium seemed to hold its breath again, waiting to see how Harvard's golden boy would handle defeat. Finally, he stood and shook her hand. His grip was firm but brief, and he met her eyes for just a moment before looking away. "Congratulations," he said quietly. You earned it." The words seemed to cost him something, but they were genuine. Professor Whitmore approached the podium for the final ceremony. "Ms. Johnson, in addition to the championship title, you receive a full scholarship to Harvard University and automatic qualification for the national circuit. But more importantly, you've reminded all of us why we value genuine intellectual competition. As photographers captured the moment, and journalists scribbled notes for stories that would be published in education journals and debate forums across the country, Professor Whitmore continued, "I would also like to address recent concerns about tournament integrity. Harvard University takes academic honesty seriously in all contexts. Investigations into misconduct are ongoing, and appropriate disciplinary action will be taken." The message was clear without being explicit. Justice would be served on multiple levels. Later that evening, as the tournament concluded and competitors began departing campus, Zara found herself alone in Harvard Yard. The ancient elms cast long shadows in the fading light, and the brick pathways seemed to glow with the golden patina of centuries. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Saw the live stream, baby. Proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Your daddy would have been so proud too." Zara smiled, thinking of her father who'd died when she was 12, who'd never seen her debate but who'd taught her that dignity was something no one could take away from you. Tomorrow she would fly back to Detroit, back to Lincoln High School and her mother's double shifts in the neighborhood where Harvard felt like a different planet. But she would return to Cambridge in the fall, no longer as an outsider proving her worth, but as someone who belonged here because she'd earned it. Justice was finally served, but the real transformation was just beginning. Monday morning's email from Dean Richardson arrived in Bradford Sterling's inbox at 6:47 a.m., exactly 12 hours after Zara Johnson's victory had been celebrated in newspapers from Boston to Detroit. The subject line was stark in its formality. Disciplinary review, immediate response required. Bradford read the message 3 times before its implications fully registered. Academic dishonesty charges. Potential criminal referral for computer fraud. Immediate suspension from all Harvard programs. Ban from national circuit competition for a minimum of 2 years. His Harvard admission, the presumption that had shaped his entire life trajectory, was now under review pending resolution of integrity violations. Across campus, Professor Whitmore was fielding calls from debate coaches, tournament directors, and education journalists who wanted to understand how a high school competition had exposed such fundamental questions about academic culture. The story was spreading beyond debate circles into mainstream media, where it was being framed as everything from elite student cheating scandal to working-class girls' triumph over privilege. "The most remarkable thing," she told Sarah Chen, a reporter from The Atlantic who was writing a feature about merit and access in elite education, "isn't that someone tried to sabotage Ms. Johnson. It's how she responded to that sabotage with grace and increased determination." Professor Whitmore paused, choosing her words carefully. "We talk a lot about grit and resilience in education, but usually in abstract terms. Zara Johnson showed us what those qualities actually look like when tested under real pressure. She didn't just overcome obstacles, she transformed them into fuel for better performance." Meanwhile, Harvard's administration was grappling with questions that extended far beyond one student's misconduct. How had their tournament security failed so completely? What did this incident reveal about the culture of elite academic competition? Most importantly, how many other qualified students had been excluded or eliminated through similar means over the years? Dean Richardson announced the formation of a special committee to review tournament procedures, implement new integrity safeguards, and examine patterns of misconduct in academic competitions. The changes would affect not just Harvard's tournament, but serve as a model for competitions nationwide. In Detroit, Zara's victory had become front-page news in the Detroit Free Press and the lead story on 3 local television stations. Lincoln High School, which had never sent a student to a national academic competition, suddenly found itself fielding calls from reporters, college recruiters, and debate programs across the country. Principal Maria Rodriguez, who had fought for funding to keep Lincoln's debate program alive despite budget cuts, was scheduling interviews with education foundations interested in supporting public school debate initiatives. "What Zara has accomplished," she told a documentary crew from PBS that had driven from Chicago to cover the story, "is proof that talent exists everywhere. The challenge has never been finding gifted students. It's been providing them with opportunities to develop their gifts." The ripple effects extended beyond individual recognition. 3 major universities announced new scholarship programs specifically for public school debaters. The National Speech and Debate Association created the Zara Johnson Fellowship for students from under-resourced schools. Corporate sponsors began funding debate programs in districts that had never been able to afford them. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. In debate forums and academic circles, people began questioning assumptions that had gone unchallenged for decades. How many Bradford Sterlings had advanced not because of superior ability, but because of superior resources? How many Zara Johnsons had been eliminated, not because they lacked talent, but because they lacked advantages? Marcus Chen, who had become an unexpected ally during the tournament, published a blog post that went viral in academic circles. "I've been competing in elite tournaments for 4 years," he wrote, I thought I was earning my success through hard work and dedication. After watching Zara Johnson this weekend, I realized I was earning my success through hard work, dedication, and $50,000 in annual coaching fees that most families could never afford. His post sparked a movement among elite competitors to acknowledge their advantages and advocate for more equitable access to academic opportunities. At Phillips Andover, Bradford's former school, the administration quietly announced a review of their debate programs, competitive practices, and ethical standards. Other elite prep schools followed suit, recognizing that the scandal had exposed cultural problems that extended far beyond one individual's actions. Victoria Ashworth and Alexandra Whitman, who had distanced themselves from Bradford during the tournament, became vocal advocates for integrity reform in competitive academics. Their status as insiders gave weight to criticisms that might have been dismissed if they'd come from outsiders. "We were complicit," Alexandra told her parents over dinner at their Greenwich estate. "Maybe we didn't send fake emails, but we participated in a culture that saw students like Zara as threats rather than competitors. We assumed our advantages were normal rather than recognizing them as unfair." The conversation was difficult, but it represented the kind of honest reckoning that would need to happen across elite communities if real change were to occur. By Wednesday, Zara's story had reached national attention. Good Morning America wanted her for a live interview. The New York Times was preparing a feature about class and competition in American education. Harvard University formally announced her full scholarship and invited her to speak at their annual Education Innovation Conference. But the most meaningful recognition came in a handwritten letter from Professor Whitmore. "Dear Zara, in 30 years of teaching, I've met many intelligent students. I've met many hard-working students. I've met many resilient students. Rarely have I met someone who combines all three qualities with the kind of moral clarity you demonstrated last weekend. You didn't just win a debate tournament. You challenged all of us to examine whether our institutions actually serve the values we claim to uphold. That kind of intellectual courage is what real leadership looks like. I look forward to seeing how you'll change Harvard, and how Harvard will be changed by having you here. With admiration and respect, Diana Whitmore." What came next would change not just Zara's life, but the entire system forever. 6 months after the Harvard National Debate Championship, Zara Johnson sat in the same Quincy House common room, where she'd first been sabotaged, but everything had changed. The leather armchairs and Persian rugs were the same, but she now belonged here in a way that went beyond winning a competition. As a Harvard summer program participant, she was taking courses in constitutional law and political philosophy, while serving as a teaching assistant for incoming freshmen who reminded her of herself, brilliant students from public schools who weren't sure they deserved to be here. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen, who was spending his summer at a debate camp he'd founded specifically for public school students in California. "Zara, check the Times education section. The story about Bradford just dropped." The New York Times article was titled, "The Fraud That Changed Everything: How Academic Cheating Exposed Systemic Inequality." It detailed Bradford Sterling's complete fall from grace. His Harvard admission had been permanently revoked, he faced potential criminal charges for computer fraud, and he'd been banned from competitive debate for life. But the article focused more on what had emerged from the scandal than on Bradford's punishment. The new oversight procedures for academic competitions, the scholarship programs for under-resourced schools, the cultural shift that had begun in elite education circles. Most significantly, it profiled the changes Bradford himself had undergone. After 6 months of court-mandated community service at a Detroit public school, specifically Lincoln High School, where he was helping to rebuild their debate program, Bradford Sterling IV had written a public letter acknowledging his actions and their broader implications. "I cheated because I was afraid," his letter read. "Not afraid of losing a competition, but afraid of confronting the possibility that my success had been built on advantages rather than merit. I was terrified that if students like Zara Johnson were given fair opportunities, they would prove that people like me weren't as special as we'd been told." The letter continued, "Working with students at Lincoln High School has taught me that talent, intelligence, and determination exist everywhere. The difference isn't ability, it's opportunity. I spent my life believing I deserved more opportunities because I was better. Now I understand that I had more opportunities, and I used them to become better. That's not the same thing. Bradford's letter concluded with a commitment to use his remaining privileges, his family's resources, his connections, his platform, to expand opportunities rather than hoard them. He was funding full scholarships for Lincoln High School debaters and working with other elite students to create mentorship programs between private and public schools. It was, Zara thought as she finished reading, exactly the kind of transformation that real consequences could produce. Her laptop chimed with a video call from her mother, who was calling from the new apartment she'd been able to afford after Zara's scholarship freed up money for other necessities. "Baby." Denise Johnson's smile filled the screen. "Did you see the article?" "Just finished reading it. How are things at home?" "Good, honey. Real good. The debate program at Lincoln is growing. They've got 22 students now, and 3 of them qualified for state championships. Your old coach says it's the strongest team the school's ever had." Zara smiled. The success of Lincoln's program was as important to her as her own achievements. Proving that one student could succeed was meaningful, but creating systems that allowed many students to succeed was transformational. "And guess what?" her mother continued. "Remember that documentary crew that came through last month? They finished editing, and it's going to premiere at the Sundance Film Festival. They want you to introduce it." The documentary, titled Earned: A Story of Merit and Justice, had followed Zara through her first semester at Harvard, while also documenting the changes rippling through academic competition nationally. It was being distributed free to schools and community centers to spark discussions about opportunity and fairness. That evening, Zara walked across Harvard Yard as the sun set behind buildings that had seemed so intimidating 9 months ago. Now they felt like home, but a home she'd earned rather than inherited. She paused at the statue of John Harvard, where tourists still gathered to rub the bronze foot for luck. A group of high school students from what looked like a summer program were taking pictures, their excitement and nervousness visible in their careful postures and wide eyes. One of them, a Latina girl about Zara's age, approached her hesitantly. "Excuse me, are you Zara Johnson?" Zara smiled. "I am. I'm Sofia Martinez. I'm here for the summer program for first-generation college students. I just wanted to say, your story is why I applied. I didn't think places like this were for people like me." "They are," Zara said firmly. "They absolutely are. And not because of charity or diversity, but because you earned your place here." As Sophia rejoined her friends, Zara thought about the letter she'd received that morning from Professor Whitmore. The Harvard Debate Society wanted her to serve as president next year. The first time a rising sophomore had been offered the position, and certainly the first time it had been offered to someone from her background. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from Alexandra Whitman. "Zara, I know this might be weird, but I'm working on a proposal for the National Debate Association about equity reforms. Would you be willing to co-author it with me? I think your voice and my insider perspective might make a powerful combination." It was weird, Zara thought, but it was also exactly the kind of collaboration that could create real change. Former adversaries working together to build something better than what they'd inherited. As she walked back to her dorm, Zara reflected on how much had changed since that misty October morning when she'd first crossed Harvard's threshold. She'd come here to prove she belonged. Instead, she'd helped redefine what belonging meant. The girl from Detroit's East Side had become more than a Harvard student. She'd become proof that when institutions actually serve their stated values, when they prioritize merit over privilege, talent over tradition, character over connections, they become stronger, not weaker. And in conference rooms and classrooms across the country, the conversations that had started with one rigged debate tournament were continuing, expanding, creating ripples that would reach students who hadn't even been born yet. Zara Johnson had set out to win a debate competition. Instead, she'd sparked a revolution. As she reached her dorm, her phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed Mom, and Zara answered with a smile. "Hey, Mama. Just wanted to hear your voice before bed, baby, and to tell you something your daddy used to say that I never told you before." "What's that?" "He used to say that some people are born to fit into the world as it is, but some people are born to make the world fit what it should be. I always knew which one you were." Zara looked back across Harvard Yard, where the ancient elms stood witness to centuries of change, and forward to all the work still to be done. I love you too, Mama. She belonged here now. Not because Harvard had accepted her, but because she'd made Harvard and herself better. If this story inspired you, if you believe that talent and determination can overcome any privilege, if you think it's time to level the playing field for students everywhere, let us know in the comments below. Type inspired. If you believe everyone deserves a fair chance to prove their worth, your support helps us share more stories like Zara's. Stories that prove merit isn't inherited, it's earned. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next incredible true story.